Good afternoon, everyone, and happy holidays. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Region 10 chapters of HFMA. The topic for today's webinar is the Washington Landscape, a healthcare perspective. I'd like to welcome today's guest presenter, Julius Hobson Jr. Julius is a senior policy advisor at Polsinelli, which is a Kansas City-based law firm with offices in over 20 cities. Mr. Hobson has more than 47 years' experience in public policy, working both inside and outside the government. He primarily serves healthcare clients with particular emphasis on physicians, hospitals, home health, and long term care providers. He also advises and lobbies on a number of other issues, including appropriations, budget, education, immigration, municipal affairs, tax policy, and congressional oversight and investigations. So, without further delay, I will hand the call over to today's guest presenter. Julius, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Nikki, and good afternoon to everybody. Let's get started with the way things look. In the current 115th Congress, as you can see, we had 236 Republicans, 197 Democrats, with two vacancies. The Speaker of the House is Paul Ryan. The Democratic leader is Nancy Pelosi. This number, the number breakout of Republicans is significant, which I will come to shortly, because of the fact that Democrats picked up so many seats. Whenever members of the House lose re-election or decide to retire, shortly after Election Day, there comes a date when they have to vacate their offices. That date has passed. There are a number of these Republicans who lost or retired who are not here. And that has a large impact on what's going on right now, which I'll come to shortly. The Senate in the 115th Congress is 51 Republicans. There are 47 Democrats with 2 independents who caucus with the Democrats. The Republican leadership, Mitch McConnell is the majority leader. John Cornyn of Texas is minority whip. For Democrats, Charles Schumer is completing his first term as the minority leader for the Democrats. Richard Durbin, the minority whip. Patty Murray is occupying a new position that was created for her, which is Assistant Democratic Leader. The one thing you have to know about the Republican leadership is that for those positions below the majority leader, they have term limited their leadership. The 2018 midterm elections made obvious changes. Democrats come noon, January the 3rd, 2019, will be in the majority with at least 235, with 199 Republicans. There is one disputed election, and this is the North Carolina 9th District. Some of you may have heard about it with regard to voter fraud. It's not clear what's going to happen there. Democrats are not likely to seat the person who is the Republican who is ahead. They may have to have a new election down there. But at the moment, Democrats picked up 40 seats. In the Senate, there'll be 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats. That includes the 2 independents. Republicans picked up 2 seats. When you look at the beginning of the 115th Congress, the current one, it's actually a gain of 1 because they started this Congress with 52, and then Jeff Sessions of Alabama resigned to become Attorney General. Democrats won that special election. So that's sort of the reality of the technical numbers. But going into the next Congress, it'll be 53-47. This last election, 2/3, I should say, under the Constitution, senators serve 6-year terms. The Senate is a continuous body. 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. 2/3 of the seats in 2018 that were up belong to Democrats. In the coming election for 2020, it's a reverse, and 22 of the 34 seats up will belong to Republicans. In terms of the House leadership, Paul Ryan decided to retire. Kevin McCarthy, who I said was the majority leader, now becomes now becomes the minority leader. Steve Scalise of Louisiana is the minority whip. You can see also the chief deputy whip is Drew Ferguson. Liz Cheney is the conference chair. That's a new position for her. The policy chair, Gary Palmer of Alabama, that's also new. For Democrats, Nancy Pelosi will be the speaker. If you have been following that, there's been some question about whether or not she would get sufficient votes to be elected speaker. There were a number of Democrats who ran both in their primaries and in the general election who said they would not vote for her for speaker. The process for speaker is that it is the first election that they hold in the House when they convene on January the 3rd. There is no electronic voting. The clerk calls the roll, and each member stands up and names the person he or she wants to vote for. 218 votes are required, at least a majority. We have elected 4 speakers since the House has been at 435 members who did not achieve 218 votes, but that's because a number of members voted present. Pelosi, I'll come back to that in a second. The majority leader will be Steny Hoyer of Maryland, minority whip Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, senior chief deputy whip John Lewis of Georgia. The caucus chair is new. That's Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Going back to the leadership issue, Pelosi has been negotiating with the freshman Democrats, and she has reached a deal with them that they would term limit the top leadership amongst Democrats in the House and made it retroactive, which means after the 2020 election, anyone in those top 3 positions who wants to run to retain that position would have to get the support of 2/3 of the members of the caucus. Be advised that both Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn oppose that proposed rules change. Pelosi says even if the Democratic caucus does not adopt that rules change, she will abide by the deal that she made. Senate leadership, Mitch McConnell continues as majority leader. As I noted before, Senate Republicans have term limited their leadership positions below majority leader. So John Thune of South Dakota is the new majority whip. The conference chair, John Barrasso of Wyoming. Policy chair, Roy Blunt of Missouri. Conference chair, Joni Ernst of Iowa. Policy committee chair, Roy Blunt of Missouri. For Democrats, all of their leadership positions remain the same. Schumer is minority leader. Durbin is the whip. Assistant leader Murray. Policy and communications chair is Debbie Stabenow of Michigan. So this is what happens as a result of the elections. In looking at the Senate Committee on Health, Education, and Labor and Pensions, for Republicans, Orrin Hatch retired. Republicans have not released a list of their committee assignments for the 116th 16th Congress. Democrats have. So what happened for the Health Committee is Michael Bennett of Colorado came off the committee. Jackie Rosen of Nevada has joined the committee. For the Senate, let me back up a second. The Senate Health Committee is responsible for all health care issues, including public health. The Senate Finance Committee is responsible for Medicare and Medicaid. And obviously you can see the changes there. Orrin Hatch, the chair, decided to retire. Republicans have term limited their committee chairs. Charles Grassley of Iowa, who currently chairs the Judiciary Committee, has 2 years remaining on his term limits to be chair of the Finance Committee, and he has chosen to resume the chairmanship for the 116th Congress. Dean Heller of Nevada lost his reelection. So we don't know yet what Republicans will be added to the committee. For the Democratic side, both Senator Bill Nelson of Florida and Claire McCaskill of Missouri lost their elections, and you can see the addition at the bottom of Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island and Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire were added to the committee. For the House Energy and Commerce Committee, amongst Republicans, Joe Barton of Texas retired. Marsha Blackburn got elected to the Senate. Greg Harper of Mississippi retired. Leonard Lance of New Jersey lost. Kramer of North Dakota was elected to the Senate, and Ryan Costello retired. Now, the interesting thing in the House is that the majority party gets to set the committee ratios. So we don't know how many seats may get added to Energy and Commerce, but it is unlikely how many Democrats will be added. It is unlikely that there'll be much change amongst Republicans, so they should be fairly stable. Amongst the Democrats, Gene Green of Texas retired. Everybody else is back. We do not know yet because Democrats have not released their committee assignment list. They haven't gone through that process yet or haven't completed it yet. So we don't know how many Democrats will be added to the committee. Energy and Commerce Committee has responsibility for Medicaid, Medicare Part B, and all public health issues. They also had a lot to do with the opioid legislation. Ways and Means Committee, Republicans, on their side of the membership, as you can see, that committee was decimated either through retirements or people who lost re-election. They lost so many members that even with the Democrats taking over, they're likely to add some members. Ways and Means Committee is a committee that has what's known as a supermajority, along with Appropriations and Rules Committee, meaning that the committee membership does not reflect the majority-minority ratio. So given how many Republicans lost, no one's going to lose their seat on this committee. The Democrats, Sandra Levin retired. Excuse me. Joe Crowley of New York lost in his primary. It is our understanding that Lloyd Doggett of Texas will become the health subcommittee chair, and as I said, that's Ways and Means. I want to go back for a second to Democrats on Energy and Commerce because I forgot to mention Anna Eshoo, the third name on the left of California, has said that she is interested in chairing the Health Subcommittee on Energy and Commerce. Going to the administration, in the Trump administration, the departments that deal primarily with healthcare or have some impact, as you probably have heard, Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney will become acting Chief of Staff to the President beginning at the end of the month. This is what he wanted. Rumor has it that he will have the job permanently, but he wants to see how things go. The Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs is an important office because whenever departments and agencies prepare draft regulations, they must submit those drafts to this office for review. And that review normally takes 60 days before they can be published in the Federal Register. After the publication in the Federal Register and the comment period, when the final regulations are prepared, they must be again submitted to this office for review before publication in the Federal Register. Alex Azar is the second Secretary of Health and Human Services in this administration. Seema Verma runs CMS and Health Resources and Services Administration. Those two leadership positions have been fairly stable. The Commerce Department, Wilbur Ross is still there. There have been some rumors that he may be forced out or may retire. That remains to be seen. Alexander Acosta is the Secretary of Labor. There had been some discussion about him becoming the new Attorney General, but because of news reports about a case that he handled as a U.S. Attorney in Florida, that sort of went away. Steve Mnuchin is Secretary of the Treasury, obviously Internal Revenue Service under that. Matthew Whitaker is the acting Attorney General. We have a nominee for Attorney General, Robert Barr. That nomination won't be considered until next year. Veterans Affairs Secretary is Robert Wilkie. One of the things that has occurred since the Clinton administration is that we've had a lot more divided government, as well as the inability of Congress to move legislation as they have in the past. So presidents have tried tried to use more of their executive authority through executive orders, presidential memoranda. Many of you have heard about executive orders, but they're usually followed with a presidential memoranda to departments and agencies instructing them how to implement executive orders. So those are important. Proposed rules and final rules are also important. For example, Congress' inability to make legislative changes that are needed to run the program effectively for the 340B discount drug program has led to a process where the use of proposed rules and final rules has changed the program. For example, in that, the outpatient hospital rule has been used to reduce payments to hospitals in that process. Regulatory guidance notices. The thing about a guidance notice is it does not require a comment period. So there's usually a guidance about how a department or agency may alter the way it interprets the regulations, and the guidance usually goes into effect the day it's published in the Federal Register. We also have interpretive rules, that is, again, interpreting how they're going to implement the law. Presidential policy decisions as well as presidential nominations. As I said, this started in the Clinton administration. George Bush picked up on that. Barack Obama stepped on the gas. Though he criticized it in the campaign, Donald Trump has done the same thing. Regardless of what these individuals said in presidential campaigns, no president has ever come into office and then willfully said, I will give up any power and authority. It simply just does not happen. The Federal Reserve, in my presentations in the past, I've not included them, but they have become more relevant. We have a new chair in Chairman Powell. Yesterday, the Fed, through the Federal Open Market Committee, decided to raise interest rates for the fourth time in 2018. When the year began, we knew there were going to be three. All four have been 0.25 percentage point. Those of you who have 401ks are well aware of what all this has meant the last few days, market being down again. The president has expressed his displeasure at the Fed interest rate increases. Chairman Powell said yesterday, the Fed remains independent. Politics don't matter. Why are interest rates important? Well, that's because if you think about in healthcare, hospitals and other provider entities either go to the bond market or they have lines of credit or they borrow money from financial institutions for whatever reason, whether it's to do more construction or anything else, buying equipment. As interest rates go up, it costs them more money, and that, of course, adds to the increased cost in healthcare. Is there an impact of the trade war? The answer to that is yes. Much of the inner workings of a lot of healthcare equipment are manufactured in China, exported to the United States, and then assembled here. So this trade war will have another impact. The question about 2018 inflation, the Fed's target has been 2%. Anything above 2%, they're likely to continue to increase rates. What was signaled yesterday is that the Fed anticipates raising interest rates possibly 2 times in 2019, 0.25 point each time. So that's what we're looking for. I mean, as I said, you understand why all this matters because the costs come out for all of the rest of us. What are the issues in the 2019 Congress, I should say in the 116th Congress during 2019? One area that we do see the possibility of a compromise between Democrats and Republicans and the administration has to do with prescription drug pricing. Reuters just reported this morning that there are 30 drug companies that intend to raise their prices in 2019. The issue is, can Democrats and Republicans come around to some kind of compromise? The issues I'm sure some of you have heard, drug reimportation, letting the Department of Health and Human Services negotiate drug prices, pegging drug prices to prices in Europe. It remains to be seen how they're able to do it, but it is a big issue. Outside of that, I don't see much in the way of come let us work together. You can expect Democrats in the House to do more of the Affordable Care Act oversight. We've just finished the enrollment period for signing up for health insurance on the federal exchanges. That is down by 4%. It's actually surprising that it's not down from last year. It's not a surprise it is, I should say, a surprise that it's not worse than that. This administration has tried to dismantle the ACA where it could. For example, it went back and looked to see what day of the week do people spend the most time on the website, on the Federal Exchange website. They found that day was Sunday. They shut the website down on Sunday. At the beginning of the sign-up period, they shut the website down for a few days, saying that they needed to refurbish it and make some changes so it would be ready. The other thing is that the administration declined to run any radio, TV, or print ads, but sign up continued. For the state exchanges, they have different dates and they have continued. Let me say, by way of disclosure, some of you are aware that several states in the District of Columbia operate their own state health exchanges. I am disclosing that my wife chairs the District of Columbia Health Benefits Exchange Authority Board. I also expect that there'll be greater oversight over Medicare and Medicaid by Democrats, particularly on the Medicaid issue, as CMS has provided waivers to states on the work requirement for Medicaid. I'm sure you've seen that Arkansas has seen their Medicaid rolls drop by over 4,000 as people fail to meet that requirement. There'll be more oversight of the Department of Health and Human Services. Also, there is a portion of the House Democratic Caucus that supports Medicare for all. Amongst Democrats alone, an overwhelming majority do not support this at the current time. The cost will be a big issue, but Pelosi will have to weave her way through that minefield of how can she keep her caucus together. Whether or not there'll be a floor vote on Medicare for all in the House, I don't know, can't predict that, but there'll be a lot of discussion about it. There is obviously the healthcare matters with regard to immigration. We're all aware of the 7-year-old who died in U.S. custody, so there'll be more concern about that. We're also looking at healthcare company mergers, a number of antitrust issues. This administration has tended to go along with these mergers. We'll see how that policy continues. There are also Department of Defense healthcare issues. The fastest growing portion of the Department of Defense budget is healthcare. Having now been in military conflict essentially since 2001, we've had more people go through the military, more people who pull on healthcare. That's a driving issue for them. All the presidents since George W. Bush have asked Congress to have TRICARE participants pay some kind of fee for their health care to bring down costs. Congress has denied that. And I might say that request by presidents has been bipartisan. Expect more oversight of veterans' health care issues. I'm sure you're all aware of all of the issues with regard to veterans' health care. This is ongoing, and I can't tell you how that will come out, but there'll be a lot there. The first Monday in February in 2019, the President of the United States is required by law to submit his fiscal year 2020 budget. We'll have to do appropriations bills. And so that will be, that the budget submission is, as they say here in Washington, is always dead on arrival, but at the same time, it always sets the tone for discussions for the balance of the year. We've not heard yet what the president will propose. We're in the last stages of that as the Office of Management and Budget is looking at various appeals from departments and agencies in terms of their passback. About 10 days ago, the president made a set a number for the Department of Defense. DOD was hoping for $733 billion over for the next budget. The president abruptly said they could have $750 billion. There is some concern now about the deficit, so I would anticipate domestic programs will be targeted for further cuts. Always in this process, the Mueller investigation and other investigations will continue. And I say other because there'll be more oversight from Democrats on the Hill. Offshoots of the Mueller investigations have included U.S. attorneys in the District of Columbia, Northern Virginia, and the Southern District of New York. That will have an impact on a number of things before the Congress. Within the administration, we're going to see the normal regulatory process, the OPPS proposed rule, and probably again another cuts in 340B, physician payment rule, hospital inpatient rule, long-term care payment rule. All of that's the normal piece. We've also had something come out of CMS within the last 10 days, and that is a CMS request for information for ways to reduce the regulatory burden under HIPAA. I'm sure that will get a lot of comments, and it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. Probably additional Medicaid work requirement approvals for states. Family planning, abortion, and fetal tissue research will continue as big issues in the administration, especially now that the 2020 presidential campaign has started. Again, the administration is likely to be affected by the Mueller and other investigations. And finally, CMS has announced that it will have a new Office for Regulatory Reform. And this is, again, in keeping with President Trump's campaign promises and about regulatory reform and the executive order he signed requiring departments and agencies to look at rules and regulations that they can pare back to reduce the regulatory burden. So we'll have to see how that progresses over time. There are some healthcare issues that will be before the judiciary in 2019. I know everyone is aware of the court case, that opinion that was decided in the Northern District of Texas last Friday, where the U.S. District Court judge declared the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional. His argument in his opinion is that when Congress, using the budget reconciliation process, repealed the individual mandate fees but left the authorization for those fees intact, that undercut the law and undercut the Supreme Court decisions upholding the Affordable Care Act. Therefore, he ruled that the Affordable Care Act is unconstitutional. He did not issue an injunction and essentially allowed his decision to stand, but allowed current law to stand. As the case goes through the appeals process, he has invited attorneys from both sides to submit to him their recommendations for how to proceed further. I will say, as a non-lawyer, there are errors in that opinion. He cites the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. That was the reconciliation bill throughout. That's the title he gave it. Technically, there is no such title under the budget reconciliation process. When the final bill made it to the Senate, a Budget Act point of order was raised about the title, and it needed 60 votes, and it didn't get it, so that title is gone. So the actual title of the tax law is the first sentence in the law. There'll be immigration health care issues that will continue to be decided by the judiciary, as well as family planning and abortion cases. Most of the abortion cases will arise out of the various states that have passed new laws about that. And again, the Mueller and other investigations working their way through the judiciary, whether in the federal courts or in state courts, because there are a number of those going. All of those will have some impact in 2019. I will stop there and turn this back over to Nikki for any questions that you may have.
All right. Thank you for that, Julius. Before I take our first question, just want to remind everyone to type their questions into that questions panel located to the right of your screen, and we will address as many as time will allow. I will go ahead and address one question about the replay. You should be, well, the slides and the replay, it looks like they were both. The replay will come directly from the chapter. You should get an email that has that replay contained, and the slides, no need to wait. Again, if you join late, you can expand the handouts panel located towards the bottom right of your screen and select that PDF icon. So thank you, Julius. As always, a timely presentation that is always even helpful for me. I'm sure our audience got a lot out of it. So some of the questions that have come through, I love this first one. How likely will we have a partial federal shutdown? It's kind of two-part. And how would a shutdown affect federal healthcare administrative actions?
Okay, that's a good question. Along with two computer monitors on my desk, I have two television screens, and right now they're both going berserk. One's on MSNBC and one is on CNBC. The market's down 450 points because of this. At least the Dow is. NASDAQ and S&P are also down. The president has told the Republican leadership that he would not sign the bill that the Senate passed last night without the $5 billion for the border wall. Democrats oppose that. I don't see any give on that with regard to Democrats. The other part of the problem is the president, when he met with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, told them that he would be happy to shut down the federal government and he would own it, something that Republicans did not want him to say. So that's sort of the line in the sand. What does that mean in terms of a shutdown? There are 12 appropriations bills, but in the process this year, through two packages, Congress enacted 5 of those. 2 that matter, the Department of Defense and the Labor, Health and Human Services Education Appropriations Bill, were combined together. So that funding is done for the full year. So those departments will remain up and running. The problem that we have is, in the past, when there's a government shutdown, secretaries of the departments determine which federal employees are essential and which are not. If you're not essential, you go home. If you're essential, you'll work, but you're working for free. And so that means things like Transportation Security Administration, Customs and Border Patrol officers, they'll all keep working. In terms of health care, I would anticipate all of that will continue to operate, primarily because Health and Human Services will continue to operate. People who are on Social Security and Medicare will be able to continue to deal with that. So everything on the health side is okay, but anything you might need that's somewhat related from some other department or agency could be a problem. This will also affect paychecks for those government employees who are involved in the shutdown, who anticipate getting a paycheck between now and the end of the year. If you're in a shutdown mode, they won't get it. But this is not as bad as previous shutdowns, which involved the whole government. But I will tell you that overall, it has a negative impact on the budget. Both the U.S. General Accountability Office and the Congressional Research Service have previously put out reports that show that preparing for a shutdown, going to shut down, and then gearing back up to run the government costs money. So there is a negative budgetary impact. There'll also be a political impact. And if we go to a shutdown and it goes through the holidays, it means that we'll be looking at a Democratic House and a Republican Senate come January that has to deal with this problem. But at the moment, as I said, Democrats are unwilling to budge on the border wall. Nikki?
Wow, thank you for that. Oh. Speaking of the new House, does Medicare for All have a chance of passage in the new Democratic control House? Any insight there?
Yes, I do not see a majority of Democrats at the moment who would support Medicare for all. The politics would have you believe that the so-called social democrats are driving the Democratic caucus. Although the caucus is more liberal, most of the self-defined social democrats lost in the primaries. So if you lost in the primary, you didn't win in the general election. But they are more vocal and they're more active, so they get more attention. No Republican would vote for it. We'll have at least 235 Democrats in the House, and I just don't see enough votes in the House. Any legislation that gets considered would have to be provided a budget estimate by the Congressional Budget Office, and most of the estimates I've seen from the outside have suggested that this could be extremely expensive. And I just don't know that Democrats could muster enough votes to do that. Obviously, it has no chance in the Senate. Nikki?
All right, thanks for that. We'll definitely keep an eye. All right, so this other question, I think you actually had a slide that touched on this in your 2019 healthcare issues. After drug pricing, what healthcare issue might get the most attention?
Probably the Affordable Care Act oversight.
Mm.
And with that, the Medicaid provision that I talked about, with all of the waivers that would allow for the work requirement under Medicaid. Those are the things I think will get the most attention from the Hill. But what I can't say right now is how much of any legislation would actually move. Since the U.S. District Court on Friday did not issue an injunction against the act, there's room for that. Also, interestingly, there's a similar case before a U.S. District Court judge in Maryland. Those proponents who want to bring down the ACA asked the judge that in light of the Texas decision, would the judge rule in the same way because of that? And that judge said, essentially, not on your life. So this thing isn't going to get resolved for some time. The question is whether or not that case gets fast-tracked through the judicial system, meaning do they skip the Court of Appeals and go straight to the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court will hear the case? And could that get us a final opinion before the 2020 election? Remember, our Congress lasts 2 years, so we're looking at 2019 and 2020 and how much impact that would have on the ACA. I know it's a long answer to that particular question, but those are what I see stand out. The other healthcare issue I think that will get a lot of attention, but may or may not see legislation, has to do with veterans' healthcare delivery. That is a particular problem. There's a lot of rumors that the administration would like to privatize the VA. There's also a greater push to allow veterans greater access outside of the VA system than they do now. But that again remains to be seen how that goes. Nikki?
All right, you heard it here first. Love it. All right, so I see that you have your information pulled up, Julius. Is it safe to say that it's okay for people to contact you if they'd like to further engage on topics similar to this?
Yes, indeed.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for that. So as we wrap up, I do want to take this time to thank our members and healthcare community for joining the call. You do have a couple more seconds to type that last minute question in if you have one that you'd like to submit. But as you exit, you will be prompted with a survey, and we would really appreciate you sharing feedback about today's event and as well as other topics you'd like to see in future webinars. I'd also like to share a couple of events that Region 10 are hosting for January. We will have another webinar on January 17th on uncompensated care strategies, unlimited number there, but they will also have one at the end of January on the 31st where space is limited. This will be an in-person HFMA workshop around cost reporting as a strategic decision tool. So feel free to visit their website to learn about either of those educational events. All right, looks like the questions have tapered. So I will use this time to thank our guest speaker, Julius Hobson Jr. of Polsinelli. It is always a pleasure to work with you and hear the great things that you have to share with our audience. So thank you for joining on behalf of HFMA, Julius.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and on behalf of Region 10 chapters, thank you everyone, the members and the healthcare community for joining. Have a great afternoon and a wonderful holiday season.